Hello and welcome to another episode of Virtual Legality. I'm your host, Richard Hoeg, managing member of the Hoeg Law business law firm of Northville, Michigan. And today we have a rather big story as Bloomberg has issued rumors, or reported on those rumors, that Netflix is planning to offer video games in addition to its traditional offerings of films and TV. Obviously, for the world of video games, which is one of the things that we're primarily focused on here in Virtual Legality, that's a pretty big deal because Netflix has a lot of money or has a lot of will to use money, regardless of whether it has cash on hand for whatever it might be doing. And with that will comes extra competition. Netflix has long said that they are competing primarily with the Fortnites of the world in a kind of leisure time market. And if they are moving into video games, well, then that brings a lot of questions for some of the traditional video game makers and players. Of course, Game Pass at Xbox has been called the Netflix of video games for some time, so my thumbnail is a little bit tongue-in-cheek. But this is very interesting news, not just because of what Netflix apparently has planned, as reported on by Bloomberg, through an anonymous source, but also the person that they have tapped for the role of heading their video game procurement and development program, who I might be a little bit more enthusiastic about than some, due to some of the games that this individual has been involved with in my past, as well as yours if you were playing games in the 90s. But without further ado, let's take a look at some of the quotes that I pulled up. Obviously, I will link the full article in the description to the video so that you can check it out in full on your own. But here we have Bloomberg reporting, as of today, Netflix Inc. is marking its first big move beyond TV shows and films, is planning an expansion into video games, and has hired a former Electronic Arts Inc. and Facebook Inc. executive to lead the effort. And more on him in a little bit. I think just that slug line for a number of people, maybe especially those that are familiar with the game industry, made them a little recoiling of what that individual might be because of the background with some of the more poorly thought of video game developers for a certain segment of the populace. But this individual has a lot of good background. It's very understandable why Netflix hired him. We'll see how it goes, of course. But before we do, we have to talk about what Netflix is even thinking. The idea is to offer video games on Netflix's streaming platform within the next year, according to a person familiar with the situation. We, of course, stop here and point out that not only is this an anonymous source, it's not even people familiar with the situation. This doesn't even appear to be sourced by multiple individuals for this Bloomberg article. They only ever refer to a person, which we don't necessarily have reason to believe is lying, but we don't have reason to believe anything about them because we don't know who they are. They also put in their article that there are some folks that are data mining the Netflix app that suggest that this is happening and has been happening for a while. So they have some kind of additional background information for this reporting, but the actual person with knowledge appears to be only that, a single person. The games will appear alongside current fare as a new programming genre, similar to what Netflix did with documentaries or stand-up specials. Just have it under a different label, and hey, along with your documentaries, you can also play Angry Pigs or Angry Birds or whatever else you'd like to play on the Netflix platform. The company doesn't currently plan to charge extra for the content. Ultimately, the move may make it easier for Netflix to justify price increases in coming years. Games also serve the purpose of helping market existing shows. Now, some of this is editorializing from Bloomberg. They get from their source, this one individual, that the Netflix plan right now doesn't include charging extra like you might see from an Apple Arcade, which they also reference in the article, where you have to pay an extra, I think it's $5, to get access to those particular games. Of course, the Apple model is pretty distinct from the Netflix model itself. And then you have Bloomberg saying, why would they do this? Well, they don't necessarily anticipate making a ton of money on games, but it could justify a price increase on the overall service or market their existing shows. They've done this in the past, right? They had a show, Stranger Things, that had a game that was related to it. I think they had one for the Dark Crystal show that they did. Those are the ones that jumped to mind. And they outsourced that and they sold them, but it wasn't within their own service. And it wasn't really, I don't think, a lot of dedicated time, effort, or resources to those various things. Now, Stranger Things 3, the game is interesting, but it's mostly just a copy of the season itself. It will be interesting to see if Netflix actually expands beyond that, just kind of copying over the plots of what they were otherwise selling, and make interesting and different things out of a video game initiative. However, Netflix has previously licensed the rights to games based on its shows, as we just talked about, but this new initiative is much larger in scope. The Los Gatos, California-based company has yet to settle on a game development strategy, said the person. So everything that we just talked about, right? Everything that we just said, hey, they don't currently plan to charge. It might be for price increases. It might be for marketing. We don't know. It'll appear alongside current fare, etc. Well, they actually haven't settled on a game development strategy at all. So you have to take all of this with a grain of salt right now. Whatever anybody knows is that Netflix appears to have hired someone that is going to move them into games in some capacity, and we don't know whether it will look like Apple Arcade at the end of the day or something else, whether it will look like Game Pass, whether it will just be on the Netflix service, whether it will be used for marketing their other shows, whether they'll go into new IP. We don't know anything. Bloomberg also notes in their article, rightly so, that many other companies as big or bigger than Netflix have failed in pushing into video games because it's a unique market. Hey, only this year we've seen Amazon have real big problems actually developing video games, pulling things that were fully released back, unreleasing them, if you will, and having a real difficult time getting them to market. Disney, of course, on your screen right now, is one of the biggest media companies in the world and has basically moved out of making their own video games in favor of licensing them out to others. One of the only big Hollywood studios that really has significant success is Warner Brothers, and of course Warner Brothers is in a state of limbo right now as it combines various aspects of its creative content with Discovery, and we don't know what's going to ultimately happen to the Warner Brothers studios. Now, who did they tap for this project? An individual by the name of MIke Verdu. He will join Netflix, as reported by Bloomberg, as Vice President of Game Development. Reporting to Chief Operating Officer Greg Peters, the company said on Wednesday. So Netflix has acknowledged that they have hired this person. They just don't know what their strategy is, and Bloomberg doesn't know what that strategy is. And that's not unusual if the strategy is a year or more out. But this is an important role. When you report directly to a chief operating officer, a C-level person at your company, that's high level. You're vice president of something that they think is going to need resources and is going to be a significant initiative for them. Now, who is he? Verdu was previously Facebook's vice president in charge of working with developers to bring games and other content to Oculus virtual reality headsets. Now, that's an important role for what he's probably going to serve at Netflix, which is bringing outside parties in. Netflix is going to have a game something. We don't know, they don't know. But it's probably going to involve not just internal development, maybe not even internal development, but relationships with outside parties. And that relationship concept is something that's going to work well with Verdu's background here. He also had a background in actually making the things. In Verdu, the company has an executive who worked on popular mobile games at Electronic Arts, including titles in The Sims, Plants vs. Zombies, and Star Wars franchises. He also served as chief creative officer for Zynga between 2009 and 2012. Now, again, as we talked about at the top of this video, Electronic Arts, Facebook, Zynga, not names that are filling the core gamer with a ton of glee about what Netflix might be looking at. In fact, Netflix might be looking at having a games label that is primarily mobile-esque. We don't even know exactly how people would be expected to interface with Netflix games. Certainly if it's going to be by just a controller with a simple thumb pad, it's going to limit what the games can be, much like their interactive content currently on their service is limited by that kind of control mechanism. If they're going to do something else, well, then the sky's the limit for what it is that they can accomplish. But he wasn't just a business guy bringing in folks for Oculus. He wasn't just a mobile guy. In fact, he was quite a bit more. It's just a long time ago. If we go and we look at MIke Verdu's career, we see that Verdu and Bob Bates co-founded a company in 1989 called Legend Entertainment. And I apologize for this particular website. This appears to be a Wikipedia entry, but it's not copied in Wikipedia itself. So I'll link it, of course, in the description of this video, but it sends you to some nowhere place. The links match up. Everything that I could find on this individual matches up, and this is the best summary, but it's a very weird website, so I apologize for that in advance. But he founded Legend Entertainment, and Legend Entertainment made adventure games. They were a spin-off, really, of Infocom, the oldest text-based adventure game company that I'm aware of. Certainly I played them when I was really young. And one of those games, as it turns out, is one of my favorite adventure games of all time. A game that might be lost to the mists of history, Mission Critical, which at that point featured Worf's actor, Michael Dorn, in a brief full-motion video role in that video game. And this is a science fiction video game that was apparently designed by MIke Verdu, was drawn by MIke Verdu, and was written by MIke Verdu. And this is a game that has stuck in my head for a long, long time. And I just have to say, I think that that's fantastic that the individual that made one of my favorite kind of closely kept secret video games from 1995 as it turns out, is going to help lead Netflix into the world of video games. More to the point, though, Legend made adventure games, right? His background at its most significant for game making is making things like Mission Critical and Star Control 3. And yes, coming into mobile and helping EA and Zynga and Facebook. So he has a business background, and he also has a game development background. This isn't just a suit or a bean counter or anything like that. So Netflix has hired someone with a pretty unique skill set. Now, I did highlight this entry in the Legend Entertainment Wikipedia summary because I found it interesting. Legend co-founder MIke Verdu left the company in 2001. Why? Deciding he was not happy in the multinational corporate environment. Sure. And then he went and joined Electronic Arts, Zynga, Facebook, and Netflix. But, hey, people change. So he has been in a multinational corporate environment for a good long time, but he isn't just new to the industry, and he has a background that I think you don't have to be scared of just because he has all of this background with Zynga and Electronic Arts and Facebook and companies that you might not like as much. Some of the other things that he's reported to have been involved in making: The Lord of the Rings, The Battle for Middle-earth, a lot of the real-time strategy games in the early 2000s at Electronic Arts, Command & Conquer 3, Kane's Wrath. I think he is also responsible for Generals, yes, in 2002. So he has a background in actually making games that people like. Now, do we know what Netflix intends to do with this background? We don't. But certainly it's a very interesting thing from a business perspective. It's a very interesting thing for the person that they have tapped to lead them. And other than the fact that they haven't settled on a game development strategy, they haven't settled on a full business strategy, so we don't know exactly what that will entail. I think this is a big piece of news. I think it's something you should pay attention to. I think certainly Microsoft is paying attention to it. Sony is paying attention to it. Hey, Epic and everybody else is paying attention to it because they're all fighting for a metaverse and a Netflix of games. And who would be better to be a Netflix of games than maybe Netflix itself? This has been Virtual Legality for today. If you like this content, we're talking about the law and business of video games, technology, and more. We've got a Patreon. Please consider taking a look at that, or just subscribing and telling your friends that we're having these conversations. If you caught this on YouTube, thank you so much for watching. And if you listen to it as a podcast, thank you so much for listening. And I will catch you on the very next episode of Virtual Legality. Virtual Legality is a YouTube video series with audio podcast versions presented as commentary and for education and entertainment purposes only. It does not constitute legal advice and does not create an attorney-client relationship. If you have legal questions about the topics discussed, please consult your own legal counsel.